What's up guys, Dr. Joe from IDPT, and today we're going to be talking about shin splints. So this episode is special for my athletes because I know that if you're someone who runs, cuts, anything in sport, that you have felt shin splints before. So we're going to talk about what they are and then what we need to do to get rid of them. Stay tuned, it's going to be a special episode. Alright guys, so what are shin splints? Shin splints are just a fancy way of saying that there's inflammation in your shin muscles, okay? But the cause of it is different for each one because there's two types of shin splints. So the first one is anterior shin splints, and that's an inflammation of the tibialis anterior muscle. And then there's posterior shin splints, which is just an inflammation of the tibialis posterior muscle. So the tibialis anterior muscle is the one that runs from this long bone here. This is the tibia. And the muscle comes over here all the way to the outside of the shin and runs up and down all the way down into the front of the foot here. And it's responsible for flexing your foot up. So when we flex our foot up, you can see that muscle really pop. That's the tibialis anterior. Now the tibialis posterior is a little bit different. That muscle is a much smaller, skinnier muscle. And if we go back to that tibia bone, that long bone right here, the tibialis posterior runs down, literally touched on the inside of this bone, and it runs down and then it wraps behind this little circle bone here. This is called the medial malleolus of the ankle, and it runs all the way to the bottom of the foot, all the way to the big toe. So now when we have that inflammation of the tibialis anterior muscle, that's typically associated with an athlete who's having trouble absorbing force. Again, because that tibialis anterior muscle flexes the foot up, this is someone who's basically stuck in that flex foot position. And the reason they'd be stuck in that flex foot position is because the body is basically trying to find any way to absorb force. Now, when we absorb force, we want to do that through our hip, through our knee, not really our ankle, because our ankle is obviously a much smaller and weaker joint than the knee and the hip. And so when this happens, it's a typical case of this muscle is just getting so overused that it's becoming painful and overstressed. Now on the flip side, there's the tibialis posterior muscle, where if you look at the anatomy, like I showed you how it runs underneath the foot, that's typically gonna be an athlete who's having trouble producing force in the right way. And so what happens is when we produce force, we need internal rotation through our hip and the rest of our body. If we cannot get that internal rotation, or we cannot produce the force the proper way, our foot is going to compensate and roll in. And when it rolls in, we're going to stress the tendon of that tibialis posterior muscle, and therefore you're going to have that chronic inflammation in that area. The typical presentation for an athlete who gets tibialis posterior shin splints is typically someone whose feet are really rolled in, and you can see the insides of their ankles kind of bulging, and that's because they cannot push through the ground correctly, and so their feet and their ankles are collapsing in. On the flip side, someone who has anterior shin splints will typically have a high arch, and that's a result now their foot is unable to absorb that force, and so we're getting all the stress in the front of the muscle. All right, so in terms of running, typically someone who has anterior shin splints is going to be someone we consider a foot slapper. So when they're running, it sounds really loud and their foot is slapping down on the ground. And I'm going to show you an example of that on this treadmill. But on the flip side, someone with posterior shin splints, that's typically someone whose foot and ankle roll in every time that they go to push off. Or you might even see like one foot really turned out to the side. And when that foot is turned out to the side, it forces them to roll on the inside of their ankle. All right, so now that we understand that concept, then we need to use those principles in the rehabilitation of the shin splints. So if you have anterior shin splints, we need to work on properly absorbing force again through our hip and through our knee, because there's no amount of stretching and massage that's gonna fix a mechanics problem. What's happening is during your running cycle, when you land on your heel, you're not absorbing the force that you should, and so it's stressing that front of the shin. So what I'm going to do is show you two example exercises of how we here at IDPT treat and train force absorption, so that you can take the exact same principles and apply it to any exercise. All right, so for anterior shin splints, what we're going to work on is force absorption, specifically with our hip, our knee, and our foot all in a straight line. So for this, we're gonna use our front foot elevated split squat, but we're gonna make it a hold at the bottom, because remember, we're not trying to push out of this, we want to absorb force. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a weight in the front of my hands here. This way it offsets my body weight, and then bring the other foot back. So our focus is on this front leg. From here, we're gonna drop straight down in a vertical line, and then we're gonna hold right here. And I wanna think about having all my weight on my front heel, and I'm working this hold right here. Typically, I wanna hold this for at least 30 seconds and do multiple sets of it. So again, I'm working on being able to absorb this weight through my hip, through my knee, and through my foot. All right, so a more advanced exercise for down the line rehab is a box landing. So what you're gonna do is step off the box, don't jump. You're gonna step off the box, and when you land, your hip, knee, feet are all in line. Now you can see why it's a down the line exercise, because it's really intensive. And if you can't still absorb force, this would make your situation worse. But again, this is with the expectation that you've been doing exercises that are lower level to build up to this moment to start to really transfer to your sport. So again, I'm gonna show it. When you land, I want quiet feet, and I want force absorption through the hips, knees, and feet. So step off and land nice and soft. I should barely hear you. Again, all we're doing is taking concepts of any exercise. So for example, this is a squat, where we're learning how to now absorb that force. All right, so on the flip side, for the posterior shin splints, like we talked about, this is for someone who's having trouble producing that force, again, through their hip, through their knee, through their entire lower extremity. So for this athlete, what IDPT is going to specialize in is getting them to produce force from the ground up the right way again. So I'm going to show you 2 example exercises of how we would do that. And again, you could take the exact same concepts and apply it to any exercise across the board. All right, now for posterior shin splints, we want to work on that force absorption. And in particular, we want to do that with the heel off the ground. And the reason is because we have our big calf muscles, which are the gastrocnemius, responsible for heel raises, but actually that tibialis posterior has a small, I want to say it's about 15 to 20% role in heel raising. So we want to work that position. So an example exercise I chose was a Bulgarian split squat on our toes. So if we're working the left leg, we're going to put that leg forward, okay, and our back leg supported on a bench. From here, we're going to lift that heel up so that we are on the ball of our foot, but don't squeeze your toes. Okay, from here, you're going to push up out of it through that front leg and drop down. Okay, I want to go for as many reps as I can, typically 2 to 3 sets of that, and you should really feel your whole leg working. So a progressed version of that Bulgarian split squat, we're going to do a sled march. And this exercise is great because it's going to get you proper force production, aligning your hip, knee, and foot, but it's also really going to translate well to your running. So it's going to get you back those mechanics that we need. Obviously, again, like I said, this is a very progressed version, starting with something as simple as a calf raise, moving on to our Bulgarian split squat, and then onto this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get on this sled. And what I like to do is have my heels all the way back. I'm on the balls of my feet the whole time, and I'm driving through the ground. So I'm going to do a small knee drive, and now I'm focused on pushing through the ground, not letting my foot turn. And I'm really pushing off that leg here. Really translates nicely to running. All right, guys, so to summarize, shin splints are simply just an inflammation in the shins because of an inability to either produce force or absorb force. Now that you understand that concept, you can take any exercise and basically bias it towards force absorption or force production. And if you do that consistently over a period of time, you're going to start to improve your mechanics, and you're going to actually start to get rid of your symptoms of these shin splints. So guys, if you found this helpful, please like, share, and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you at the next video.